Glenn is an ugly down-bad doctor who can only treat sick monster girls. However, they all turn out to be borderline freaky and want him to rearrange their guts. It all started after humanity and monsters stopped World War III between the two sides and started living together in harmony. Now, Glenn, a doctor for monster girls, has every degenerate doctor's secret dream. Today, Glenn is healing a cowgirl and rubbing her milky jugs to check for cancer. He doesn't find any lumps and moves on to check her ear. He starts rubbing it, while the cowgirl makes happy noises. After he finishes his examination, he tells the cowgirl that she's pregnant with a bull's baby. The father runs inside happy after knowing she didn't cheat on him with a horse. Then Glenn's assistant, a snake girl named Safen Tite, slithers in to give them flowers to congratulate them on their baby. After the clinic closes, Glenn notices that Safen Tite is a bit moody. Safen Tite tells him she's uncomfortable seeing him alone in a room with a married woman and making her make happy noises by rubbing her jugs. Safen Tite starts pounding it, asks him to call her Sophie like in her imagination when they're shaking the bed. Then, a mailman knocks on the door and hands him a special delivery. It's a message from their teacher and the doctor of the central hospital, Dr. Tully. The next day, Glenn and Safen Tite go to the arena. They ride a carriage passing the city filled with both monsters and humans. Tully asks Glenn to come to help her do a physical test on her fighter patients, but Safen Tite doesn't agree as they have to leave their humble clinic. At the arena, the centaur who pulled their carriage asks Glenn to do his best for the centaur princess. So the centaurs greet them, led by a female centaur named Tsilia, who is also a fighter. The fighters there can't believe their eyes seeing Glenn as he is a real human doctor, but Tsilia tells them to lower their gaze as it is rude. Safen Tite is amazed at seeing her power over the fighters, and Tsilia waves her jugs around to show her badge. Glenn blushes and Tsilia tells him that horses like her like to take it like a dog. Tsilia starts telling them of her family heritage while laughing like a snobby princess, and Glenn finally knows why she's called a princess. Later, Glenn checks the health of a cat girl, and she starts flirting with him, wanting his human baby. Safen Tite gets jealous and pulls her dirty claws away from her precious doctor. Then, Tsilia enters to be checked. She starts undressing and talks about how she as a future ruler would need to get married, and her type are cute doctors who are packing a horse-sized sausage underneath. Safen Tite pulls her away out of jealousy, and they start talking to each other. Safen Tite wraps her tail around her and tells her that she's gotten fat and should go on a diet to keep up with Glenn's stamina at night. Afterward, Tsilia's attendants, Kai and Morna, come to meet Glenn. They are worried for their princess health, but Glenn assures her that Tsilia is healthy. Then, they tell Glenn about a worry that they have about her. At night, Glenn can't sleep because of what he heard and Safen Tite joins him. She starts talking about how they are childhood friends and came from the academy to calm him down. Glenn remembers what Kai and Morna said. They told him that Tsilia has been shitting bricks and kept losing her fights in the arena, and they don't know why. Even with all the talents and hard work Tsilia carried, she kept losing. Glenn and Safen Tite think about what could have caused it and wish that the reason she kept losing was the pressure she carried with the hopes that she would get better. She goes to bring him some alcohol to calm himself, while Glenn starts thinking there are things that a doctor cannot heal even with his ability. Then, Safen Tite comes back with the drink and serves it to him in a glass. Glenn drinks it and is surprised to see her drinking from the whole container. Then, Glenn gets an idea that asks her to come with him again to meet Tsilia. Safen Tite refuses and wraps her tail around him tightly in a drunken rage and tells him that she won't let him make horsey babies with Tsilia. The next day, Tsilia loses her fight again. She starts getting frustrated and not knowing what's wrong with her. At night, Tsilia trains even harder, but Glenn comes to visit her. Glenn knows what caused her to lose all the time, and it's her hooves. He tells her that her hooves have grown to make her movements unbalanced, while her two underlings wear horseshoes to counter it. He offers to trim it and switch to horseshoes, but Tsilia refuses as her pride won't let it. Suddenly, Kai and Morna trap her in place and force her to get her hooves. Tsilia sees the equipment and starts crying as she is scared to feel pain. She starts rebelling and Glenn goes under her to get her feet up. She begs him to be gentle as it's her first time, and Glenn gets to work. Tsilia starts creaming her knickers and makes happy noises to the sensation of Glenn's touches. Then they bring out the horseshoe fresh from the oven, and Tsilia starts panicking out of fear that she'll get burned. Next, Glenn is putting in the nails, and Tsilia goes even more berserk. Safen Tite has enough and puts her tail around Tsilia and shoves it in her mouth to keep her mouth stuffed in silence. Then, they continued with her other legs while Safen Tite kept stuffing her mouth till they were finished. A few days later, Tsilia is on a winning streak after adding the horseshoe while Glenn and Safen Tite watch from the stand. Tsilia fights a lizard fighter and beats her in one blow. Tsilia sees Glenn in the stand and waits to have his babies. Safen Tite gets jealous and wraps him with her tail out of jealousy. A long time ago, Safen Tite was given to Glenn's family household as a hostage, as the war between monsters and humans raged on. Glenn and Safen Tite got closer until it was time for her to leave with the war ending. They look at each other with pain as they get separated, and Glenn chases her carriage while crying. They met again at the academy years later. Back in the present, Safen Tite is out of her sunblock and Glenn asks her out to get some. Later, they travel by boat to their location. Safen Tite is happy that they get to go on a side quest, just the two of them. They arrive at their destination, the waterways, and the Mermaid, who is pulling their boat, asks them where they are going. Safen Tite wants a Birkin, but Glenn tells her to focus as they are broke. They enjoy their sightseeing and praise Lady Skady for being a great politician for her work on the waterways. They get to the shop and buy the things they need for the clinic before going back home. Then, Safen Tite asks the Mermaid to stop them at a gift shop. Safen Tite's shopaholic instinct starts tingling, and she admires all the shiny things around them. She starts splashing money buying she doesn't need. After a few hours, she only buys one thing and tells Glenn that the real reward is the moments she spent with him. The Mermaid tells them that there will be a mermaid show at night where mermaids sing and dance, pissing off PTA in the process. Safen Tite wants to see the show, but Glenn tells her no as they have work to do. Afterward, another mermaid calls them a cute couple and asks them to come to her store. Safen Tite falls to her cheap words and convinces Glenn to come to her shop. The mermaid introduces herself as Lulala, and she offers to sing them some Taylor Swift. Glenn stares at Lulala for too long, and Safen Tite licks him and starts accusing him of wanting Lulala's baby fishies. Then they pay Lulala to sing, but Lulala refuses to sing to these broke-ass bitches as their money is not enough, especially after Lady Skady herself invites her to sing in her palace. Glenn offers to give her a free medical examination instead, and Lulala accepts. Lulala starts singing, and her voice makes Billie Eilish look like a joke. Suddenly, Lulala starts coughing and feels bad about herself. Glenn rizzes the fish and tells her that he will examine her somewhere more private. Glenn starts examining her and asks her to open her mouth wide for Big Daddy Glenn. He checks inside and sees that Lulala has inflammation inside her throat caused by naughty night activities. Then he asks to check her pepperonis and Lulala gets embarrassed. He uses his stethoscope and doesn't find an issue. He checks her gills as he thinks it's odd for her gills to stay open when on land. Glenn takes inspiration from Dr. Johnny Sins and starts sliding in to check, while Lulala makes happy noises to his fat fingers. After the examination, he tells her that she spends too much time on land as a mermaid, which causes her gills and throat to dry. He asks her why she keeps doing it, and she tells him that she needs to make money by singing to people on land to survive. She tells him that she needs to work hard for her family after her dad left them to buy some milk at Bikini Bottom. She wants to sing for Lady Skady so she can earn money for her family, but until then, she needs to work as usual. Suddenly, a human kid falls into the water, and the tide is pulling him. Lulala jumps in and swims like prime Michael Phelps to save the boy. Underwater, Lulala has issues with her breathing, but channels her inner Baywatch and saves the kid. Glenn does a CPR on the kid, not realizing that Lulala lost consciousness and fell into the water. They realize that Lulala is gone and Glenn jumps into the water to save her. Lulala starts saying her final regrets about not being able to help her mom financially and begs for fate to help her. Glenn says eat fate and saves Lulala himself. He kisses her to force her to breathe from the gills and succeed. Before fainting himself, Safen Tite pulls them out with her tail to the boat. Lulala refuses to let go of Glenn's manly chest, and Safen Tite gets jealous. A few days later, Lulala sings in front of the whole town and receives a standing ovation. She thanks Glenn and Safen Tite for giving her cough drops for her throat, but she is still flustered at Glenn after he kisses her underwater and runs away. Somewhere in the city, a ghoul named Kunai is chasing after a bandit and falls to an ambush. Meanwhile, Glenn is treating a slime in his clinic, and she falls for his handsome face. Then, Lady Skady herself visits their clinic. Lady Skady is a well-known woman for her great effort in helping create Lindworm, the city where monsters and humans live side by side, and also where Glenn's clinic is located. Skady comes with her bodyguard, the golem, Kunai, who talks on Skady's behalf. Kunai tells the two peasants to be grateful for the presence of greatness, which is Skady herself. Skady asks their help to find Kunai's missing arm she lost in battle against the bandits and attach it back to her. Skady explains that their teacher Dr. Tully has refused to help them, and she adds that kunai is a flesh golem product of an idiotic doctor who tried to create life, which is why kunai hates doctors. Later, Glenn tries to help kunai, but she makes it difficult, not wanting him to help her. Kunai tells them that she will find her arm herself and leaves the clinic. She sees someone suspicious and follows them. Kunai lost her track and suddenly the bandit attacked her. Meanwhile, Glenn refuses to give up and packs his equipment to help kunai. He looks around for kunai and the missing arm until he hears a scream. He goes to see and meets Tsilia at the crime scene. She points at a severed leg on the floor and Glenn goes to examine it and realizes it belongs to kunai. Somewhere in the city, kunai is crawling on one leg, wanting to find the bandits. Then she screams happy noises as her legs start squirming due to someone stroking the legs on their sensitive spots.
It's him!
Tsilia explains how badass kunai truly is as a fighter and squeals every time Glenn touches kunai's severed leg. Tsilia tells him to be careful with the leg as it makes him look like some weirdo with a foot fetish. Meanwhile, kunai calms down and knows that Glenn has her leg. She starts feeling the souls of the body parts trapped inside her, and they get louder in her head. Glenn continues his search and meets Lulala in the middle of the city who is doing better in life. Lulala tells him that she has a present for him, and it turns out to be kunai's missing arm. Kunai starts whimpering happily as someone is stroking and rubbing the shit out of her arm.
Stop it. Get some help.
Lulala explains that someone threw the arm into the water to get rid of it. After finding the missing limbs, Glenn needs to find kunai and Lulala gives him the idea to ask the severed limbs instead. Kunai is on the floor begging for someone to stop tickling her feet, and Glenn finally finds her. She tells Glenn that she doesn't need his help, but Glenn tells the zombie bitch to shut up and let him cook. Then, Glenn pulls out some scissors and needles that are of a higher quality than the ones on her body. He tells her that the person who did this to her is not a doctor. She tells him to stop with the extra treatment, but he tells her that it's necessary to put some respect for her different body parts, which once belonged to a different soul. She looks at her hand and sees the souls and finally lets Big Daddy Glenn cook. He starts connecting her blood vessels and kunai is amazed by his skills. She starts talking about how her creator made her unable to feel pain and suffering. She shows Glenn respect and asks him why he goes the extra mile for her. Glenn rizzes her and tells her that he's a doctor who takes care of all his patients' needs. Kunai is happy that there are doctors like him in the world. Then he moves on to the left leg, and kunai blushes seeing his loving nature. Meanwhile, at the clinic, patients are disappointed that Glenn is not there to take care of their needs. One of the patients, Arachne, tells Safen Tite that she should invite Glenn to the pub that they usually go to so they can double-team him all night. She teases Safen Tite that Glenn is probably 10 inches deep inside someone else, and Safen Tite explodes at her. Meanwhile, Glenn continues to attach the leg, while kunai tries to hold back her whimpers due to his soft touch. She starts whimpering louder, telling Glenn to be more gentle. But Glenn goes deeper and harder to fix her leg, causing kunai to drool and cry at his manly touches. Afterward, kunai is pissed off out of embarrassment, and she wants to punish Glenn like the naughty boy he is. Then, she thanks Glenn for saving her and leaves. Meanwhile, the bandits are watching Glenn closely. Afterward, Glenn goes back to the clinic and finds Safen Tite in his office who is now pregnant. He calls bullshit and wants to take her to the Mori show to prove that he is not the father.
You are not the father!
Then she pulls up her skirt to show the gift that Arachne left for her. Inside it is an egg and Glenn starts examining it. Safen Tite's snake instincts tingle and realizes there are bandits outside. They barge into the clinic and Safen Tite takes out one of them. Glenn and Safen Tite run away and conclude that the bandits thought that Glenn worked with kunai. Safen Tite tells Glenn that she will protect him and they should avoid the clinic for the night. They plan to report this to kunai, but she's already there with a bandit on her shoulder. Kunai explains that the bandits have been kidnapping harpies and forcing them to lay eggs before selling the eggs on the black market. Glenn shows her the egg they have and she confirms it belongs to a harpy. Then, a bandit tries to attack, but kunai handles him easily. Kunai invites them to come with her to Waterway as all the security personnel are unavailable to give them protection. She tells them that it's best if they stay with her during her mission to expose the bandits. Then they get on a boat pulled by Lulala with Lady Skady on board. They demand Skady to answer why Lulala is on the mission, and she answers that it's part of the deal that she's allowed to sing in the city. Glenn accuses them of exploiting her poverty, and kunai tries to intervene, but Glenn tells the zombie bitch to know her role and shut her mouth. They try to convince him that Lulala is perfect to be an informant, as she spends most of her time in the city, and that they pay her a lot of money. Glenn tries to retort, but Lulala steps in and tells Glenn that she decides to join the mission. Then, kunai discusses the plan of ambushing the bandits' hideout, and has the patrol team ready to barge from the front door. Their main goal is to rescue the Harpy girls who are kidnapped. Skady apologizes for involving them in this. They arrive at a bridge and the bandits ambush them with arrows, but they dodge it. Kunai goes for the attack and gets hit by arrows in the process, but she continues as she feels no pain. Suddenly, Tsilia and her team join the battle and overpower the bandits. They tell Glenn and the others to continue heading to the hideout. One of the bandits starts monologuing about how humans and monsters are never meant to live in peace, but Tsilia tells him to touch grass and look at the beautiful reality before beating him with one hit. Meanwhile, the boat arrives at their destination and Kunai orders Lulala to swim away to safety. Then the bandits' leader shows up and begins a war of words against Kunai. He tells her that what they are doing, including trafficking living beings, is needed as their source of income after the war ended. Kunai has enough, calls him an ugly dog, and tells him to square up. They start clashing swords against each other, and Kunai tells the others to take their chance and save the Harpy girls. Then the patrol team barges in, while Glenn and the others look for the girls. One of the bandits tries to attack them, but Skady shows her true strength and easily beats him. They open a door and find the kidnapped Harpy girls. Glenn calms them down and starts examining their health. They ask Glenn for help as one of the girls has a pain in her stomach. Glenn gets to work and starts examining her stomach. He concludes that an egg is stuck in her stomach due to the stress the mother is experiencing. He opens her pants and goes between her legs to help her give birth. Then he starts massaging her stomach to help her with the contraction, but bandits are waiting outside. They barge in to attack, but Safen Tite and Skady team up to handle them. The battle rages on with the girls taking the spotlight. Safen Tite starts monologuing to herself about an incurable illness that she has in the family lineage she carries. Her family, the Nags, are also experts in poison and assassination techniques. She once received a task from her mother to wipe out Glenn's lineage if the war didn't end. Now she's happy that didn't happen and wonders if she had the guts to do it to Glenn. Then, a bandit stabs her in the tail and she starts feeling weak. She sees the blade has poison on it and collapses. She looks to Glenn at her weakest point and thinks that he's such a wonderful man before losing consciousness. Later, she wakes up in bed with Glenn waiting for her. He tells her that he isn't worried as the poison that was used is a mere plaything for a lamia like her, and Safen Tite is amazed by his knowledge. Glenn informs her that everyone is safe and the Harpy girl manages to give birth safely. Then, Safen Tite starts whittling her tail and confesses that she was previously sent as an assassin to slay his whole family. However, Glenn smiles and tells her that he already knew as his family showed why humans are at the top of the food chain by researching Safen Tite's family beforehand before accepting her into their house. He starts telling her a story of how a servant of his family once poisoned her food, causing her to get sick. At that moment, Glenn was the one who stayed by her side and cured her. He thanks her for being there with him to save the Harpies. Suddenly, it's mating season and Safen Tite wraps Glenn in a sus position as it's baby-making time. She takes off her armor and lays on top of it, not caring for the risk they might face. Glenn starts panicking as her eyes scream out, "I want that Willy," but she collapses as the poison is still in her system. Then, he tells her to rest, but she asks him to hold her tail until she falls asleep, and Glenn gladly holds her tail. A few weeks later, Glenn and Safen Tite are on a journey with Tsilia and her subordinates. Tully assigned them to do checkups on the Harpies. Glenn wonders how Illy, the girl who he helped give birth, is doing. They get information that Illy has no family and is now unable to fly after being kidnapped. Glenn wants to do something about it. Then, a landslide happens, hitting the carriage and the centaurs. Glenn rushes out to the centaurs, and Kai is horribly injured. Kai tries to continue, but Glenn concludes that she has a fractured leg and needs immediate assistance at the village. Then the Harpies arrive to escort Glenn and the others. Glenn explains to them their situation and asks the Harpies to carry Kai. They arrive at the village and meet the elder of the Harpies. Tsilia goes to talk business with the elder, while Glenn goes to visit Kai. Glenn examines Kai, and it turns out to be a sprain. Kai tries to force herself to stand up, but fails out of pain. Lorna tells her to rest and not worry, as she will always look after Tsilia. Afterward, the Harpies form a line for Glenn to examine them. Then the girl Harpies come and thank Glenn for saving them. Glenn asks for Illy, and they tell him that Illy doesn't want to meet him. Later, Glenn meets Lorna alone near a river. Lorna tells him that Tsilia is there with her, but they get separated. Glenn asks Lorna about her relationship with Kai, and she tells him the story of how they came to be. They were both war orphans who turned into badasses after serving Tsilia's family. Then Tsilia comes and scolds Lorna for wandering off alone, leaving her unattended. At night, Tsilia has dinner with the two doctors and vents her concerns about Lorna's sudden loss of brain cells. becoming clumsy ever since they got into the village. Safen Tite gets curious and asks Tsilia about her business with the elder. Tsilia reveals that her family is looking to work together with the Harpies and use their ability to fly to accommodate their business, but Lorna starts acting weird and ruining the whole thing. Tsilia asks Glenn to examine Lorna, but Glenn thinks that Lorna is just sad due to Kay's condition. Tsilia doesn't accept his answer and offers to give them the finest booze, to which Safen Tite begs Glenn to accept her offer.
Of course!
Then, Tsilia explains that although she's close with her two henchwomen, she is still their master, and they have a distance in their relationship, hence why she's begging Glenn to help Lorna. Later, Glenn is stressing about how to help Lorna's sudden change in spirit, while Safen Tite cuts him some apples. She gives Glenn the idea that to help Lorna from worrying about Kai, she needs to be trapped inside. Then Glenn reads his book about centaurs and gets some naughty ideas. Meanwhile, Lorna is lost in her own thoughts of not being able to cope with not having Kai by her side for the first time in her life. Her anxiety rises higher and higher until Glenn calls her name. He gives her the blindfold that he usually uses at night when Safen Tite goes to Boink Boink with him. Lorna feels better as her mind becomes clear with her goals. Then Glenn adds things for his naughty kink and ties the blindfolded Lorna in a bondage from 50 Shades of Grey. Lorna goes further and begs him to get tighter and harder, while Safen Tite sees it with disgust. Glenn explains that it's for science and to discipline Lorna using techniques used in the past for centaurs. It turns out to be effective, and Tsilia is grateful for the kinky breakthrough. Tsilia goes to Lorna and thanks both her and Kai for being a loyal servant to her, and tells them that she loves them. Later, Kai is confused as seeing the bondage on Lorna, but Lorna digs it. Then, the two girls put Glenn in the middle of a milky sandwich and tell him to hurry up, marry Tsilia, and become their master so they can run a horse train on him. Glenn backs off from the four-legged freaks, and they tell him that they can't wait for his horse-sized meat to stab their horse back as their master.
You sussy baka!
A few days later, Kai is healed. They plan to examine Illy, but she only wants to be examined with the reward of meeting Tsilia herself. Then, they go to Illy's house and see her feathers lifeless on the floor. Glenn goes to examine Illy and uses his manly fingers to do so. Illy starts squirming and whimpers to his touches, and ends up screaming daddy. Then, Glenn checks her temperature and puts his hand on her armpit while tickling her juices. Safen Tite pulls him back and tells him to be gentler, while Tsilia encourages him to go harder in Illy. Then, Glenn concludes that Illy is not sick and is just molting like a normal bird. Illy refuses his examination as she never lost this many feathers before and calls Glenn a mother ducker. She attacks him, but Tsilia stops her and puts her in her place. Illy runs away somewhere, and Tsilia asks Glenn to let her handle it. Tsilia finds Illy and talks to her. Illy tells Tsilia that she's her #1 fan and she wishes to be able to fight like her in the arena. Tsilia feels insulted and corrects her that she doesn't just fight, and tells Illy that it's a show of elegance. Then, Tsilia grabs a stick and challenges Illy to show her moves, and tells Illy that she's a bitch for talking shit to her baby daddy doctor. Afterward, Tsilia is receiving treatment and tells him what happened and how she fights for Glenn's honor. Safen Tite agrees and tells her she should have shoved the stick straight into Illy. Glenn calms the two feisty girls down and tells them that they need to do something about Illy. During their spar, Tsilia spanks Illy around and tells her she doesn't have the juice to be a fighter. But Illy refuses to give up as she feels that she doesn't fit in with her own people. Tsilia tells them that Illy always runs away from everything and is looking to run away for good after her feathers are back, while Glenn is worried that she might get kidnapped again. Then, Tsilia gives Glenn one of Illy's feathers that fell during the spar, and Glenn notices something on it. The next day, they gather all the feathers with the same color as Illy's, and Tsilia tells Glenn that she wishes that Illy would find somewhere she belongs and get better. Suddenly, Safen Tite arrives with a lot of random feathers as she rushes to Glenn out of jealousy of him being taken away by a donkey like Tsilia. Safen Tite goes away, and Tsilia tells Glenn that she might be struggling in that village as it's a horrible environment for snakes like Safen Tite, and to give her some of his love. Then, a Harpy arrives and informs Glenn and the others that Illy is gone. Meanwhile, Illy is lost in her thoughts of pain after she's unable to fly and see the world from above. She is on top of a high tree branch and is looking to force herself to fly. She looks down in fear and gives up. Illy remembers Tsilia telling her that even if she can fly, she will have to land in the end, and she thinks that Tsilia is deeper than the deep. Meanwhile, Glenn and the girls are looking for her. Safen Tite finds Illy using her snake eyes, and they go to fetch her. Illy demands them to leave her alone and go play with rocks instead, but they refuse. Glenn wears the big boy pants and takes over the situation. He tells her that he is wrong and shows her that her feathers are changing. Meanwhile, Tully already knows that Illy is not sick, and she sends Glenn there anyway for her amusement, seeing her old student running around like a headless chicken. Glenn smiles and tells the bird bitch that she is shedding more of her feathers because she is growing her adult feather, and that she has a special blood of the phoenix in her veins. Illy can't believe it, and Glenn tells her that she will soon be able to fly again with feathers that all birds will be jealous of. Illy raises her feather and is happy to be able to fly again in the future. A few days later, Illy shows Glenn her new feathers that look like fake ice cream flavors. Glenn asks her why she didn't want him to examine her in the first place. Illy tells her that she can't see him with a straight face after he saw her push out a whole egg from her hoo-ha. Illy runs away, passing Safen Tite, who is happy to see her happy. Glenn feels that he's useless in this mission, but Safen Tite assures him that his big manly hands did a lot for Illy. Illy flies away, dropping a feather, and Glenn catches it. He feels that the feather is too hot to handle, and thinks that maybe it's the phoenix spirit inside her still burning. Afterward, Big Daddy Glenn teaches the harpies how to shower, cause they stink more than an otaku. Glenn brushes one of the girls, and she starts feeling tingly. Glenn offers others to try, and all the girls want his pleasurable touches.
He can't keep getting away with it!
Later, Illy barges in through his clinic window with sticky liquid all over her and asks Glenn for help. Glenn examines and concludes that it's from an Arachne, which is a half-man, half-spider, and tells Illy to take a hot bath. Illy asks him to join her, but Safen Tite is not having her cheap woos. Later, other harpies show up with the same issue, and Glenn decides to handle the root of the problem. Then the doctor couple goes to the forest to find the Arachne. They follow the silk as if it's breadcrumbs and run into its trap. Then the Arachne shows up, and it turns out to be Mommy Arachnia, who is Safen Tite's friend. Arachnia introduces herself and explains that she's here to track down the harpy with the phoenix feathers. Later, Glenn takes Arachnia to meet Illy. Arachnia sees her and starts bugging and chasing her, wanting to see her feathers. Illy runs away to the forest, passing Tsilia, who is training, and Tsilia panics seeing the spider. Tsilia meets the doctors and demands them to control the spider mommy on roids. Safen Tite defends her spider friend by quoting Uncle Ben, but Tsilia tells her that bitch old man is dead. They continue arguing, but Glenn separates them and explains Arachnia's reason for being here. Safen Tite leaves on a bad note, and Tsilia warns Glenn that he's overworking Safen Tite and that he should relieve her stress by giving her the Dr. Johnny Sin special. At night, Glenn gives Safen Tite a break by presenting her a day with the horses in the hot spring bath. Safen Tite smiles and accepts his gift. The next day, there are rumbling sounds near the village. The elder sends his best men to check on it. Meanwhile, Safen Tite is enjoying her hot bath with the horses, leaving Glenn alone. Then, Arachnia goes to Glenn's office and tells him that she's ill. Glenn starts examining her, and she follows his every direction like a good little spider. Then she tells him that she admires a human like him who cares for monsters. She adds that she now sees why Safen Tite wants to climb him and explore every bit of his crook and crannies. Arachnia asks him to walk with her, and he accepts. He follows her around while she is joyfully gathering some materials for her clothes. Glenn's worries are gone and leaves, but he steps on another trap. Arachnia tells him that she's going to have a little fun with the doctor to cuck her best friend who has the hots for him. She tells him that Safen Tite wants him, but is too scared to make the move. Glenn tries to reason with Arachnia, but she tells him that she would like to get a taste of him so both she and her best friend can share the same baby daddy. Arachnia goes insane and tries to put her tongue in his throat, but Tsilia shows up and saves him. Tsilia tells Arachnia that she heard everything and will not allow such degeneracy to happen on her watch. They start fighting over Glenn and arguing about who is the better multiple-legged creature. Arachnia calls her a hypocrite for acting all high and royal, when in reality she's just as much of a sausage-gobbling freak as her. It triggers Tsilia, and she attacks the spider. Tsilia refuses to be compared to an 8-legged bitch like her, and they both attack each other. Suddenly, Safen Tite shows up and saves Glenn from the crossfire. She asserts her dominance over Glenn and makes it clear that Glenn has no time for love at all. Saying that hurts Safen Tite, and Glenn notices it and feels sorry for her before passing out. At night, Glenn is awake and starts drinking with Safen Tite. Safen Tite gets drunk after what she did and tells Glenn that she loves him. It shocks Glenn to the core of his willy while Safen Tite continues drinking. She feels insecure about her new rivals, especially Tsilia, who has shown her determination in wanting to marry Glenn. Safen Tite is afraid that one day someone will take him away from her. Glenn chugs his glass and assures her that she's the only one for him. Suddenly, a loud bang is heard and the ground starts shaking. They go outside and meet the elder, who explains to them that a giant god is awakened and angry. The ground trembles harder, destroying some of the homes in the village. The Harpies start panicking as some of them are unable to fly due to age. Tsilia steps up and calms down the people like a true leader. She first orders Illy to inform Lady Skady that boy, Aaron Yeager, has returned. Then she orders the rest to prepare for evacuation and orders Arachne to use her silk to help them pack their luggage. She looks to Glenn and counts on him to help those unable to fly to start flying again. Later, everything goes according to Tsilia's plan. After helping the last patient, Glenn and Safen Tite start packing their bags, but another earthquake hits them and almost destroys their precious medicines. The villagers are evacuating and Glenn notices that Tsilia is nowhere to be found. In the mountains, Tsilia is traveling alone as she plans to face the giant god and buy time for the others to get to safety. She plans to propose to Glenn if she survives and starts laughing like a maniac. Suddenly, Safen Tite shows up and tells her to get her grin off her face. Tsilia tries to act tough, but Safen Tite knows that she's nothing more than a scared softie. Then Glenn pulls up and Tsilia is shocked. Tsilia tells them that she will still battle the giant god, but Safen Tite tells her that she will join her and not stop her. Tsilia tells them to go home, but Safen Tite refuses and starts an argument. Glenn calms them down and gives them his plan of convincing the giant to stop attacking. Tsilia accepts his madness of a plan with the condition that if Glenn fails, they will resort to throwing hands, and Safen Tite even prepares a poison for the giant. The ground rumbles again, and they waste no time to go to the giant. They see the giant and her gigantic melons, and Glenn goes straight to negotiate with her. Suddenly, the giant sneezes and blows them away with her snot, and tells them that she heard of a doctor in the village and is looking for him to help her illness. The group is in shock at her request. Meanwhile, Kunai thinks that Illy is lying about the giant, but she convinces her that she's real. Then, Skady clams them down and says that the giant is a gentle one and her name is Dion. The next day, Glenn examines Dion in front of her big-ass head. He asks Dion to show her tongue, and is taken aback by the size of it, thinking of all the freaky things she could do to him with it. Glenn concludes that the giant has a cold and asks her when she starts feeling it. Dion informs him that it was 10 years ago after meeting Lady Skady, and she just slept it off, thinking she'll be fine. Suddenly, Glenn falls and lands safely on her melons. He starts admiring the size of it and then sinks in between the cracks, fulfilling every short king's dream with their tall baby mamas. Later, Dion drinks the medicine Glenn made for her, while the Harpies start hanging out with her while talking about cute giant boys. The elder comes and apologizes as his story of the giant being evil is wrong as it turns out. The giant was just lonely. Glenn tells Safen Tite that Dion needs warmer clothes of the same size as Nikocado Avocado's t-shirt. Safen Tite knows who to call and gets Arachne. The spider starts getting excited, but she needs more materials. Then the Harpies fly down and give her the materials she needs. Arachne starts working, and the horse girls work on Dion's hair. A few hours later, Dion is the drippiest giant in all the land. With that, Safen Tite and Glenn go back to the clinic. A few days later, Illy comes to visit them and hands a letter to Glenn, inviting him to the waterway opening ceremony. At night, Glenn has dinner with Tsilia. They start discussing everything that happened, and he tells her that dinner is on him. He praises her for her bravery in wanting to sacrifice herself against the giant, and Tsilia boasts herself as a champ, when in reality she was scared shitless. Suddenly, Safen Tite shows up and Tsilia tells her to not disturb her date. Safen Tite changes her tone and tells Tsilia that she respects her. But she tells Tsilia that she will not let Glenn fall for her. Tsilia declares war on who will have Glenn's genes inside them first. And Safen Tite doesn't back down. The next day, Glenn and Safen Tite join Skady and Kunai for the waterways ceremony. Lulala and Arachne show up in style as a part of the ceremony. Skady tells Glenn that she appreciates his work medically, and he is honored. Then he sees Skady's golden tail and wonders. Afterward, the ceremony starts and the audience goes nuts, seeing Lady Skady in all her might. Skady opens up with a speech that would make Optimus Prime proud of how they built the city of Lindworm as a place for peace between monsters and humans, and how it's named after a dragon. Suddenly, Lady Skady collapses in front of Kunai. Later, both Glenn and Safen Tite are in her palace to check on her after they are denied to help Skady as her main doctor is Tully. They go to meet Tully in her office, and she wraps her tentacles around Glenn and starts sucking him freakishly. Safen Tite stops the degeneracy she's seeing and asks her to get her to take her tentacles off her precious Big Daddy Glenn. Shuli lets go and starts talking shit to Safen Tite. but Safen Tite counters by calling her a Walmart Davy Jones who gets passed around the block. Then, Tully thanks the two for taking care of Skady, and Glenn asks her to explain what illness Skady has. Tully tells them that she can't disclose information, but tells them that it's a rare disease that has already spread inside her body. She continues to explain that her illness is gonna slowly eat Skady and potentially cause heart failure, and the only reason she's not dead is because she's a dragon. Tully starts stressing and explains that it's extremely difficult to heal her. Glenn pushes for more information, but Tully brushes him off and tells him that Skady herself doesn't want to get better. At the clinic, Glenn is patching up Kunai's stitches, and they discuss more about Skady. Kunai refuses her master's wishes, and she wants for Skady to get better. Kunai asks Glenn to treat Skady even if they're going against her wishes. Glenn accepts, and they start their master plan to help Skady. Kunai advises Glenn to sneak into Skady's room, but Safen Tite starts bugging out of fear that Skady might have a BBL underneath her dress to rub Glenn's sausage with it. Later, they get in front of Skady's room, and Kunai asks for only Glenn to enter. Safen Tite tries to join in, but Kunai asks her to calm her peaches and have faith. Then, Glenn goes in and the girls listen in through the door. Glenn meets Skady in her true dragon form, and she asks him why he's here. Glenn explains that Kunai sent him to examine her. Skady accepts his examination but warns him that his efforts are pointless. Then, she opens her clothes and reveals a giant tumor in her heart. Glenn starts touching it gently to examine it. She explains that the tumor has taken over her veins and blood circulation, like a tree root growing in the dirt. Skady continues by telling the story of how this tumor is the price a dragon must pay after abandoning their place near the gods and starts living on Earth. The dragons start getting affected by the Earth's nature and turn into weird forms, with Skady turning almost human form, not being able to turn back into her former glory. Then, Glenn starts examining her scales, which tickles the lady, and then examines her tail, which makes the cute dragon whimper out of pleasure. Glenn continues rubbing the tail deeper into the wings, while Skady starts whimpering even harder and ends up crying out of pleasure at his almighty touch. Kunai and Safen Tite barge in and see Skady on the floor, exposed and wet to Glenn's skill. They both start bugging and look to bend Glenn over and show him what a bitch he is deep down, but Skady calms them down. She tells them that her examination is over and goes to sleep. The next day, Glenn goes to Tully and asks her help to perform surgery on Skady. He explains that he needs her multiple tentacles to quickly connect the veins back to the heart directly after they remove the tumor. Tully argues with him as she feels that he won't be able to handle the thousands of veins that he needs to fix. Glenn tries to convince her that he can with her help, and she lashes out at him as she thinks that it's not possible. She tells Glenn that she has tried to convince Skady, but failed as Skady already felt hopeless about her situation. Then, she wraps her tentacle around Glenn and asks him if he believes he can save Skady. Glenn confidently with his massive balls answers "I will" and tells Tully that he wants to save Skady alongside his teacher, as she is the one who wants to save Skady more than anyone. It touches Tully, and she uses her tentacles to wrap both Glenn and Safen Tite. Her tentacles start moving on their own, sucking, kissing, and rummaging into deep places, causing Safen Tite to make happy noises. Later, Safen Tite is beaten on the ground with white creamy goo all over her. Tully tells Glenn that they still need one more person to help the surgery to be successful, and they don't need to be a doctor, but they just need to be great at threading needles. Glenn has an idea and goes to Arachne, but she refuses. Glenn begs her desperately to agree, but she tells him to touch grass and find someone else. Then, Safen Tite brings the big guns and tells her that if she accepts, she gets to wear matching nurse cosplay with Safen Tite, and Arachne accepts. Glenn is confused as to what in the blue hell just happened. Later, Safen Tite tells Glenn that Arachne was always gonna accept, and she was just playing hard to get and is scheming something. Then they discuss the rundowns of things and face a new challenge. Meanwhile, Kunai goes to Skady's room and begs her to trust Glenn and the others to take the surgery, but Skady tells her that fate has already made their choice. In the city, Glenn goes to meet Mimi, the Cyclop, and she falls from her chair as she's scared to see people with two eyes. They go to her boss to ask him to make something for Glenn. On their way, Mimi runs into a dude and tears off her clothes, revealing her fat juicy dumpy to Glenn, and she slaps him. Then, they meet the boss of the Cyclops, and Glenn asks him to make equipment custom-made for dragons for Skady's surgery, and the boss takes it as a challenge. He warns Glenn that making the needle will be the toughest part, and that there is no guarantee of success. The boss looks at Mimi and offers her the job of making the needle, and Mimi rejects it. thinking that World War IV will start if she fails to make the needle. She looks to Glenn, who supports her and ends up accepting the job. Later, Arachne is training her surgery skills on Kunai, and she struggles as she is an amateur. Kunai tells Glenn that Skady is still reluctant to get the surgery as she feels that it's her time to go. For the longest time, Skady has always hated the hostile history between humans and monsters, and she made it her mission to create a city of peace. And after the city was created, she felt she had no more purpose to chase after. Arachne offers them a solution, and that is for Glenn to cook up her Big Daddy energy and raise the dragon lady like Donkey did in Shrek. Afterward, Glenn and Tully check on the equipment, and Tully gets nervous and starts biting her own tentacle. She offers Glenn if he wants some, but he declines. Then the Cyclops bring in the newly custom-made equipment, and Tully is impressed by them. Glenn notices a new toy, and the Cyclops tells him that it's Mimi's own creation that she has been drafting all night. Meanwhile, Mimi is still unsatisfied with her work, and she sees a machine there. Later, Glenn receives news that Mimi has collapsed and hurries himself to see her. Glenn examines her and opens her clothes to help her breathe. In her sleep, Mimi remembers the moment she found her purpose in life. Skady and Kunai came to the Cyclops workshop and delivered a chilling speech. They told the Cyclops that they would no longer create weapons that take lives, but instead, they would start creating medical tools to save lives. The Cyclops are inspired, and Mimi is shaken to her core. She worked hard after getting the chance to help Skady, who inspired her and caused her to collapse. That Mimi wakes up at the clinic with Dr. Loverboy. Glenn himself arises her to keep resting. Arachne gets jealous and starts teasing Safen Tite that they never got this treatment. Mimi notices that her melons are out and calls Glenn a freak for both seeing her milky jugs and fat dumpy. Safen Tite hears what Mimi said and demands an explanation, while Arachne gives her a quickly made shirt and tells Glenn to be more caring with a woman's clothes. Later, Glenn examines Mimi and concludes that she has motion sickness due to her excellent eye, not being able to see things like wheels spinning and more. Glenn asks her what caused her to feel nauseous, and she explains that her newly designed needles needed a special machine. Then they go back to the workshop, and she apologizes to the boss for the trouble she caused. The boss apologizes back and assures that he will take over making the needle, but Mimi has already figured it out. She shows them the machine and starts explaining endlessly how her machine is able to mass-produce the needles they need and also for future demands. She gets too close and pushes her melons on Glenn and starts blushing. Then, they examine the finished product and are impressed with Mimi's work on the needles, praising her endlessly. Later, Mimi thanks Glenn for trusting in her to create the needles. Glenn tells her to keep her head up with pride when she walks. She feels insecure that people might see her weird eyebrow, but Glenn calls it cute to give her confidence, and Mimi runs away calling Glenn an eyebrow-licking freak. A few days later, Skady and Kunai attend a meeting of goofy-looking monsters, and Glenn is waiting for them there to try and convince Skady to get surgery. At the clinic, Glenn continues training Arachne on how to do surgery, and Safen Tite is jealous. Safen Tite tells Glenn to hurry up and go to the central hospital so he will get away from Arachne's slimy hands. After Glenn leaves, Arachne tells Safen Tite just to be blunt and tell Glenn that she wants his cute doctor babies. Safen Tite is content with her feelings as she knows that Glenn will always come back to her. Later, they have dinner with Tsilia for a girls' night out. They start talking about the anesthesia that will be used on Skady, as there are not a lot of them that would work on dragons. Safen Tite points out that they will be using alcohol, and Arachne starts drinking it heavily without a care in the world. Then, they start talking about love, and Arachne tells them that she goes both ways, and would love nothing more than to take the both of them and make them beg for her creamy spider soap. Later, Arachne breaks into the clinic to find Safen Tite's precious belongings, but Safen Tite catches her in the act.
Stop right there, criminal scum!
Arachne loses her cool, and Safen Tite tells her that the item she's holding is precious, as it's a gift she gave to Glenn. Arachne throws the item away and escapes through the window. Tsilia is waiting for her outside, and they successfully trap Arachne. Then, Safen Tite doesn't turn her to the police, as she knows Arachne's bad habit. She has an obsession with wanting the possession of her loved ones, which in this case is Safen Tite. Safen Tite calls her out of being an insecure bitch who likes to test her relationships. She previously tried to riz Glenn to make Safen Tite jealous and test if Safen Tite would hate and leave her. Tsilia makes an example of herself to Arachne, with her undying trust in her henchwoman, and that she should not test her relationships, but instead strengthen it. Arachne cries as it's the first time she has genuine friends that she can trust. Then they start drinking again, and Arachne starts opening up about her insecurities. She doesn't understand how they and Glenn don't leave after everything she did to them. Arachne confesses that she tried to prank and hurt Glenn, but he kept getting kinder to her, which confuses Arachne's tiny spider brain. Safen Tite suggests they do a test on Arachne. She starts asking Arachne questions about Glenn and if she had dreams about him and his chiseled abs, or how his soft manly voice just makes her tremble in pleasure. Arachne says yes to all of them, and Safen Tite tells her that she's sick. She tells Arachne that both she and Tsilia have the same disease, which is love, which shocks Arachne to her core. Meanwhile, Glenn meets Skady again to convince her to get surgery, and Skady doesn't understand why he's doing this every day. Then, she asks Kunai to lift her up, but she's not there. Glenn offers her his services and she accepts. He lifts her up to feel her softies and they see the scenery. Skady tells Glenn that the reason she refuses surgery is because she has achieved her life goal as a dragon who descended from heaven and helped create a city where peace is both the question and answer. She feels that her life has served its purpose, but Glenn disagrees. He tells her that she has endless people fighting to save her and the whole city praying for her to be cured. Glenn wishes for Skady to stay longer and feel the love of the people she helped. His words touch her, and Skady asks Glenn to give her some recommendations of things to do as she lives a very long life as a dragon. Glenn starts naming things to do, foods to eat, and movies to watch. It excites this cute dragon even more, and she asks him to name more things to do with her googly eyes. Glenn falls to her riddles and advises romance. Skady gets quiet and asks him to put her down. After his endless convincing, Skady accepts his suggestion to continue living. Later, they start the surgery with Skady knocked out by the anesthesia. They open Skady's clothes and start opening a hole in her chest. Tully warns them that Skady's body is different than a human's, as she is a fire-breathing dragon in her normal form, which proves to be more difficult for knives to penetrate. Later, everything goes smoothly and they start cutting the tumor. Suddenly, Skady's body temperature turns into lava, as it's a dragon's nature to start producing flames when their body is in danger. Tully goes God mode and picks up a lot of the surgeon knives. She tells the girls to step back and tells Glenn to grow a pair of juicy balls to help her get this over with. Skady starts glowing and burns all the tentacles that are touching her. Tully urges Glenn to land the finishing touch while she keeps Skady's chest open. Glenn remembers the game Surgeon Simulator and cuts Skady's tumor from her. The city is praying for the success of Skady's surgery. Then, they carry out Skady's body and Glenn tells Kunai that the surgery is a success. Later, they have a ceremony in the middle of the city and Skady speaks out to her people, telling them that she will continue serving them as their protector. The crowd goes wild and Kunai congratulates Skady for her health. She tells Kunai that she is grateful for everything that happened thanks to Glenn, and she looks for him. Kunai tells Skady that Glenn is in the clinic, and Skady wastes no time but to go visit him and asks him to be her baby daddy. Meanwhile, Glenn is taking care of the sick Safen Tite. Safen Tite starts acting weird, looking around like a lost puppy, and Glenn notices it. He asks her to open her mouth and starts examining it. He puts his sweet fingers inside her throat while she tries hard not to scream and whimpers. Then he sees her tongue and finds the issue. He starts putting honey on her long-ass tongue while she imagines choking on him. Later, Safen Tite gets embarrassed and closes her face while Glenn leaves for his job. Glenn goes to the city and meets Skady and Kunai after their carriage crashes. Skady jumps and hugs him, asking him to make her completely his. Kunai pulls Skady away and tells her that she should chill out. Then, Skady opens her clothes and shows herself to Glenn, but his tent is not raised an inch. He asks her to close her buttons, but she tells him to do it, which he does. Skady feels depressed as Glenn keeps his zipper closed and doesn't make a move on her. Then Mimi shows up and tells them that she can fix the carriage. They blink once and Mimi fixed it like she's Fix-It Felix. Skady goes to Mimi and thanks her for saving her again with the carriage and the needles. Mimi starts bugging, offering to lick Skady's crusty dragon feet as she doesn't know how to take compliments. Then, Skady gifts them with presents in the form of giant wine barrels filled with wine and leaves. Glenn sees the time and asks Mimi to look after the barrels as he needs to do a doctor's house visit. Mimi gets confused and Lulala shows up to tease her before leaving her all alone. Meanwhile, Arachne visits Safen Tite and gives her a new dress. Arachne teases Safen Tite by telling her that she will take Glenn away if she doesn't get well soon. Safen Tite doubles down and tells Arachne that she can never have Glenn for herself. In a Harpy village, Dion is helping the villagers by lifting up a boulder that is bothering them. They invite her to join their celebration by offering her food, and she gives them even more food capable of feeding 3 villages. Meanwhile, Glenn comes back to Mimi and tells her that he found someone to help them carry the wine barrels. Enter Tsilia and her crew with a carriage behind them. Then they go their separate ways, with Lorna carrying Mimi in her carriage. Later, Glenn, Tsilia, and Kai go back to the clinic. They start discussing Glenn's future marriage with Tsilia. They talk about how many kids and how many days per week can both Lauren and Kai join in and have a taste of Glenn. Glenn politely rejects, but Tsilia assures him that Safen Tite will get her turn twice a week if he accepts the proposal.
That's what I'm talking about.
At the clinic, Safen Tite is worrying that some nasty will take Glenn from her. Arachne starts teasing her to imagine how popular Glenn is and how easily he can examine and rearrange the guts of different girls using his magic stick. Suddenly, Illy shows up and gives them food from her village. She asks Safen Tite where Glenn is, and Glenn shows up just in time. All the girls start swarming him, wanting his babies. Safen Tite gets jealous and stops the others from doing so. Tsilia asks to come in, and Glenn lets her. Safen Tite is in shock at how much food Glenn brought home, and he explains that everyone he met on the road starts giving him food. Skady and Kunai show up and gifts Glenn with even more food. Skady calls Glenn daddy, and Safen Tite is confused as Mimi and the Cyclops show up to join the party, and Safen Tite has an idea. Later, they cooked all the food and had their own little party with everyone enjoying themselves. The girls gossip about how popular Glenn has become, and Tsilia warns them that a new rival has arrived in Skady. Skady tells Glenn that since the surgery, the world has become even more beautiful in her eyes, and she thanks Big Daddy Glenn for changing her mind. Skady starts getting chummy with Glenn, and Safen Tite pulls him away with her tail. She squeezes him out of jealousy as he stops paying attention to her. She tells him that she wants to slide her long tongue into his throat, but Tsilia stops the drunken snake and they start arguing. The drunk girls start fighting over Glenn, and they lay down on top of him, while Glenn can only smile and enjoy the love he's experiencing in his life. He feels grateful for starting a clinic with a snake monster in a city that needs him. If you enjoyed this recap, then clap the like button and comment a quote once said by a wise man that said, "There is no better death than death by monster girls snoo snoo." Subscribe to the channel if you're yet to for more plot-filled animes. If you like anime recaps like this, then watch this video right here.